The words cut through the warm, cinnamon-scented air of the Golden Harvest restaurant like a blade through silk. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now." Patricia Holbrook's voice was not loud, but it carried across the dining room with the sharp authority of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused midway to every mouth. The entire restaurant, filled with families dressed in their Thanksgiving best, turned to look at the man standing near the hostess podium. James Sullivan stood perfectly still, his shoulders squared despite the visible tremor in his hands. He wore a faded olive-green military jacket, the kind issued to Marines decades ago, with patches so worn the insignia was barely visible. His jeans were clean but threadbare at the knees. His boots, though scuffed and separating at the soles, were laced with military precision. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of deep grooves that came not from age but from sleeping outside in all seasons. His gray-streaked beard was neatly trimmed, an act of dignity maintained against impossible odds. But it was his eyes that told the real story. They were hollow, haunted, and desperately, painfully hungry. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice hoarse but steady, "I have money. I can pay. I just wanted a hot meal. It's Thanksgiving." He held up a crumpled $20 bill, holding it out like an offering, like proof of his right to exist in this space. Patricia's perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin, disgusted line. She was a woman in her late 40s, her hair sprayed into an immovable helmet of platinum blonde, her navy suit tailored and severe. She ran the Golden Harvest with an iron fist, priding herself on maintaining what she called a certain standard. She took a single step back from James, as if his proximity might contaminate her. "Sir, this is a family establishment. Our guests have expressed concern about your presence. You're making people uncomfortable." The restaurant was decorated for the holiday with an almost aggressive cheerfulness. Garlands of autumn leaves were draped across the crown molding. Plump fabric pumpkins sat on every windowsill. Each table had a small cornucopia centerpiece overflowing with gourds and artificial grapes. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, competing now with the thick, terrible silence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the November evening was already dark and bitterly cold. A thin layer of frost was beginning to form on the glass. Inside, the dining room glowed with warm golden light from chandeliers made to look like old-fashioned lanterns. The contrast was almost obscene. At a corner table near the window, Marcus Chen sat with his 8-year-old son, Tyler. They had been in the middle of a conversation about whether pumpkin pie was better than apple pie when Patricia's voice had cut through the room. Now they both sat frozen, watching the scene unfold with a growing sense of horror. Marcus was 36, a family law attorney with a small but respected practice. He wore a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, his black hair cut short and professional. His face was kind, but carried the perpetual exhaustion of a single father who worked too much and slept too little. Tyler sat beside him in a button-down shirt that was slightly too big, his dark eyes wide behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had his mother's eyes. Marcus felt the familiar ache in his chest at the thought, pushing it down as he always did. "Dad," Tyler whispered, tugging on Marcus's sleeve. "Why is that lady being mean to him?" Marcus didn't answer. He was watching James Sullivan's face, watching the way the man's jaw tightened, the way his eyes flickered with shame and anger, and something that looked like soul-deep weariness. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough in the 2 years since Rachel died. "Ma'am," James tried again, his voice still calm, still respectful despite the public humiliation. "I'm a veteran. I served 3 tours in Iraq. I just want to sit down and have a meal. I can pay for it. I won't bother anyone." Patricia's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened further. "I don't care if you're George Washington himself. Look at yourself. You're filthy. You smell. My guests are trying to enjoy their holiday meals with their families, and frankly, your presence is ruining the atmosphere." She gestured around the room as if inviting everyone to agree with her, and to Marcus's disgust, some of them did. A woman in a cream-colored cashmere sweater actually nodded, her hand moving protectively to her young daughter's shoulder. An older man in a sports jacket made a sound of approval. A couple near the fireplace turned their chairs slightly, angling away from the confrontation as if the sight of James was something they needed to shield themselves from. But others looked uncomfortable. A teenage girl at a nearby table was staring at her plate, her cheeks flushed with second-hand shame. A middle-aged man was frowning, his fork forgotten in his hand. And Tyler, Marcus noticed, was gripping his water glass so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Please," James said, and the word came out broken. "It's Thanksgiving. I haven't had a real meal in 3 days. I just want to sit down. I won't cause any trouble, I promise." "You're already causing trouble," Patricia snapped. "You walked in here looking like something out of a homeless shelter, and yes, before you say it, I know exactly what you are. I can smell it from here. We have standards, and you don't meet them, so I'm asking you nicely to leave before I'm forced to call the police." The threat landed like a physical blow. James flinched, his hand moving instinctively to his chest as if to protect himself. For just a second, his military bearing cracked, and Marcus saw beneath it to the broken, traumatized man underneath. He saw someone who had probably been screamed at by cops before, who had probably been moved along and arrested for the crime of existing in public while poor. He saw someone who knew exactly how that phone call would end. "I have money," James repeated, but his voice was hollow now, defeated. He was already backing toward the door. "I don't want your money," Patricia said coldly. "I want you out of my restaurant." Tyler made a small, wounded sound. "Dad, that's not fair. He said he's a veteran. He fought for our country. Miss Patterson told us in school that we're supposed to honor veterans, especially on holidays. Why is she being so mean?" Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 2 years. He thought about Rachel, about the last conversation they'd had before the accident. They'd been arguing about something stupid, something he couldn't even remember now. But he remembered the last thing she'd said to him. "Be the person Tyler needs you to be, Marcus. Be the person who stands up." He'd failed at that so many times since she died. He'd been so focused on just surviving, just getting through each day, that he'd forgotten how to do anything else. He'd become small and careful and afraid. But Tyler was watching him now, waiting to see what he would do. And James Sullivan was turning toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat, his $20 bill still clutched in his shaking hand. Around them, the restaurant had returned to a low murmur of conversation. People were going back to their meals, relieved that the uncomfortable moment was passing. They were cutting into their herb-roasted turkey and their brown sugar-glazed ham, spooning cranberry sauce onto their plates, reaching for their wine glasses. They were grateful that someone had dealt with the problem so they could go back to enjoying their expensive holiday meal in peace. Patricia was already turning away, smoothing down her suit jacket, her expression one of satisfied righteousness. She'd done her job. She'd protected her establishment. She'd maintained her standards. James's hand was on the door handle when Marcus heard his own voice, louder than he'd intended, cutting through the relieved chatter. "Wait." James stopped. Patricia stopped. The entire restaurant stopped. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. His heart was hammering in his chest, and his hands were trembling slightly, but his voice was steady. "Don't go." Patricia whirled around, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Chen, this doesn't concern you. Please sit down and enjoy your meal." But Marcus wasn't sitting down. He was walking toward James, closing the distance between them with deliberate steps. Tyler scrambled out of his chair and followed, his small hand finding his father's. The room was watching them now, all pretense of polite disinterest abandoned. Marcus stopped a few feet from James and looked him in the eye. Up close, he could see the details Patricia had used to justify her cruelty. The dirt under James's fingernails, the faint smell of unwashed clothes in the street, the hollow exhaustion in his face. But he also saw something else. He saw the careful way James had trimmed his beard with whatever tools he had available. He saw the straight line of his posture, the military discipline still ingrained in his muscles despite everything. He saw the Purple Heart pin on his jacket collar, tarnished but present, and he saw the profound, crushing loneliness in his eyes. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, "I'm Marcus Chen. This is my son Tyler. We were just about to order dinner." He paused, feeling the weight of every eye in the restaurant on him. "Would you like to join us?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that pressed against eardrums that made hearts beat louder. James stared at him, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Patricia made a strangled noise of outrage. Tyler squeezed his father's hand and smiled up at James, a smile of such open, uncomplicated kindness that it made Marcus's throat tighten. James started, then stopped. His eyes were suddenly bright with tears that he was fighting desperately not to shed. I couldn't. I don't want to impose. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, Marcus said. I want to. It's Thanksgiving. No one should eat alone on Thanksgiving. Patricia stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. Mr. Chen, I must insist that you return to your table. As I've already explained, this person is not welcome in this establishment. If you continue to... Marcus turned to face her, and something in his expression made her words die in her throat. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who spent his days in courtrooms. Are you refusing service to a paying customer based on his appearance? Patricia's jaw tightened. I'm maintaining the standards of this restaurant. Is refusing service to veterans one of those standards? Marcus asked, his tone still calm, still reasonable. Because I'm fairly sure that violates several anti-discrimination laws, and I'm absolutely certain that the local news would be very interested in a story about an upscale restaurant throwing out a homeless veteran on Thanksgiving. The color drained from Patricia's face before flooding back in two angry spots high on her cheeks. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for words that would reassert her authority, but Marcus had shifted the ground beneath her feet. Around them, the restaurant had gone so quiet that the soft jazz from the speakers seemed suddenly obscene, a cheerful soundtrack to a moment that had become anything but. Mr. Chen, Patricia said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage, I don't appreciate being threatened in my own establishment. This is a private business, and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to take your business elsewhere. He's eating at my table, Marcus said, and those 5 words hung in the air with the weight of a verdict, simple, final, undeniable. He turned back to James, whose face had gone pale beneath the weathered tan of someone who lived outdoors. The veteran was shaking now, his hands trembling so badly that he had to shove them into his jacket pockets. His eyes were fixed on Marcus with an expression of such raw, desperate hope mixed with disbelief that it was almost painful to witness. Please, Marcus said, gentler now. He gestured toward his table by the window. Join us. We'd really like the company. Yeah, Tyler piped up, his voice clear and certain in the charged silence. He stepped forward and looked up at James with those wide, uncomplicated eyes that hadn't yet learned to see the world the way adults did. We have an extra chair. My mom used to sit there, but she died 2 years ago, so now it's always empty. You can sit there if you want. Do you like pumpkin pie? I think it's better than apple, but Dad says they're both good. The simple, guileless invitation seemed to break something inside James. A single tear escaped down his weathered cheek before he could wipe it away. His voice, when he finally found it, was barely a whisper. I don't want to cause trouble for you folks. The only trouble here, Marcus said, his eyes cutting back to Patricia, is the manager threatening to call the police on a paying customer. And just to be absolutely clear, ma'am, I'm a lawyer. I specialize in discrimination cases, so please go ahead and make that call if you'd like. I'd be happy to explain to the responding officers exactly what's happening here. I'd also be happy to explain it to the local news, to your corporate headquarters if this place has one, and to social media. I promise you the story of a restaurant throwing out a homeless veteran on Thanksgiving, that goes viral before the turkey gets cold. A murmur rippled through the dining room. Marcus could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the way some diners were now looking at Patricia with something between embarrassment and disgust. A man at a nearby table, heavy-set and wearing an American flag pin on his lapel, was nodding slowly, his expression grim. The teenage girl Marcus had noticed earlier had pulled out her phone and was holding it up, clearly recording. Her mother made a half-hearted attempt to make her put it away, but the girl's jaw was set with teenage defiance. Patricia's face had gone from red to white and back to red again. Her perfectly manicured hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Marcus could see her doing the calculation, weighing her options. She was trapped and she knew it. If she backed down, she lost face in front of her staff and regular customers. If she pushed forward, she risked exactly the kind of public relations nightmare Marcus had just outlined. Fine, she spat, the word like poison. But if there are any problems, any disturbances whatsoever, all three of you are out. Do I make myself clear? Crystal, Marcus said evenly. He placed his hand lightly on James's shoulder, feeling the man flinch at the touch before relaxing slightly. Come on, let's get you fed. The walk back to Marcus's table felt like it took an hour, though it was only perhaps 20 steps. Marcus could feel every eye in the restaurant following them. Some faces were hostile, filled with the same disgust Patricia had shown. The woman in the cream cashmere sweater was whispering urgently to her husband, shooting scandalized looks in their direction. An elderly couple near the bar had turned their backs entirely, as if the sight of James at a dining table was too offensive to witness. But others were different. The man with the flag pin gave James a solemn nod as they passed. A young couple at a corner table, both wearing what looked like medical scrubs under their jackets, smiled encouragingly. A waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back in a bun, caught Marcus's eye and mouthed the words, "Thank you," as she hurried past with a tray of drinks. Tyler had run ahead and was already pulling out the chair at their table, the one that faced the window. "You can sit here," he announced proudly. "You can see the lights outside. Dad says they're pretty when it gets all the way dark." James lowered himself into the chair slowly, as if afraid it might disappear beneath him. His movements were careful, controlled, and Marcus recognized the body language of someone who had learned to make himself as small and non-threatening as possible. When he was finally seated, James placed his hands flat on the white tablecloth, staring at them as if he'd never seen his own fingers before. Marcus sat down across from him, and Tyler bounced back into his own seat, immediately launching into cheerful chatter. "I'm 8 years old. I'm in 3rd grade. My teacher's name is Miss Patterson, and she's really nice except when people don't do their homework. What's your name? Dad says it's polite to introduce yourself, but I guess I already did that, so now it's your turn." A ghost of a smile flickered across James's face. "James Sullivan. It's nice to meet you, Tyler. And you, Mr. Chen. I don't know how to thank you for—" "Marcus," Marcus interrupted gently. "Just Marcus, and you don't need to thank me. You said you have money to pay for a meal, and that's exactly what we're all doing here, having a meal on Thanksgiving." The waitress who had mouthed, "Thank you," appeared at their table, her order pad in hand. Up close, Marcus could see the name tag pinned to her burgundy uniform. Donna. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying or fighting not to. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice warm despite the obvious tension still crackling through the restaurant. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Tyler ordered a hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Marcus asked for coffee. James hesitated, his eyes darting to the prices on the menu that Donna had placed in front of him. "Just water is fine for me," James said quietly. "Actually," Marcus said, "bring him the coffee too, and the hot chocolate. I think we could all use something warm." He looked at James directly. "Order whatever you want, really. It's Thanksgiving." Donna smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "The Thanksgiving special tonight is herb-roasted turkey with all the traditional sides, mashed potatoes, stuffing, green beans, cranberry sauce, dinner rolls, and a slice of pie for dessert. It's our most popular meal today." James's hands were shaking again. He stared at the menu as if the words were written in a foreign language. "I couldn't possibly. That's $32. I only have 3 of those, please," Marcus said firmly. "And maybe some extra dinner rolls. My son lives on bread when he can get away with it." "Dad," Tyler protested, but he was grinning. Donna wrote down the order, then did something that made Marcus's throat tighten. She reached out and briefly touched James's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity so quick that it might have been missed if you weren't watching. "Thank you for your service, sir," she said quietly. "My son is in the army. He's deployed right now, 3rd tour in Afghanistan." James looked up at her, and the expression on his face was one of recognition, the kind that passed between people who understood a particular kind of waiting and worrying and loss. "Tell him to stay safe," he said hoarsely, "and thank him for me, for still believing in something worth fighting for." Donna nodded, her eyes bright with tears she was fighting to control. She hurried away, and Marcus saw her stop by the kitchen door to dab at her face with her apron. The silence that settled over their table was awkward but not uncomfortable. Tyler was swinging his legs under his chair, humming softly to himself. James was staring at the window, at the darkness outside and the reflection of the warm restaurant lights in the glass. Marcus found himself studying the man across from him, really looking at him for the first time. James Sullivan was probably in his early 40s, though the hard living made him look older. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who had worked with them his whole life. The jacket he wore was authentic military issue, not some costume shop replica. The patches on the shoulders were faded, but still legible. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. The purple heart pin on his collar was real too. Marcus could tell by the way it was worn, the way the enamel had chipped and the metal had tarnished. This wasn't something he'd bought at a surplus store for effect. This was earned. "How long were you in?" Marcus asked quietly. James turned from the window, and for a moment Marcus saw something hard and distant in his eyes, the look of someone remembering things they wished they could forget. 12 years, enlisted right out of high school, did 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan before that, got out in 2012. "That's 13 years ago," Marcus said, doing the math quickly. "What happened after?" James's jaw tightened. "Life happened. My wife Jenny died while I was on my 2nd tour in Iraq. Cancer. By the time they got me emergency leave and I made it home, she was already gone. I never got to say goodbye." His voice was flat, emotionless in the way of someone who had told this story too many times, who had worn the sharp edges of the pain down into something he could almost bear to touch. Tyler had stopped swinging his legs. He was listening with the intense focus children give to stories that frighten and fascinate them in equal measure. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and meant it. "I lost my wife too. Car accident, 2 years ago. I understand that particular kind of empty." James met his eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared grief that needed no words. "Kids?" James asked. "Just Tyler," Marcus said, reaching over to ruffle his son's hair. "He's my whole world." "I had a daughter," James said, and his voice finally cracked. "Emily. She was 6 when Jenny died. My sister took her when I got out, when I couldn't hold things together anymore. She's 16 now, lives in Oregon. I haven't seen her in 4 years. I send letters when I can, but I don't know if she gets them. Don't know if she reads them if she does." The pain in those words was so raw that Marcus felt it like a physical thing. Tyler reached across the table and put his small hand on top of James's scarred, weathered one. The gesture was so simple, so achingly kind, that James made a sound like something breaking. "I bet she reads them," Tyler said, with the absolute certainty of a child who still believed the world was fundamentally good. "I would read letters from my dad even if he was far away, even if he couldn't be here. I'd want to know he was thinking about me." James stared at Tyler's small hand on his, and tears were running freely down his face now, cutting clean tracks through the grime and exhaustion. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing me, for letting me be human again, just for tonight." Donna returned with their drinks, setting them down with practiced efficiency. The hot chocolates came with towers of whipped cream and marshmallows. The coffee was steaming and rich-smelling. She placed an extra basket of bread on the table with small containers of butter and honey. "Your meals will be right out," she said. "And gentlemen, I just want you to know, your dinner tonight is on me. I'm paying for it myself, out of my own pocket. It's the least I can do." "Donna, you don't have to," Marcus started. "I know I don't have to," she said, her voice firm. "I want to. My son is over there right now, eating. MREs in some desert I can't pronounce, missing Thanksgiving with his family. The idea that someone might treat him with kindness if he ever needs it, that someone might see him as a person and not just a problem to be solved or swept away, that means everything to me. So please, let me do this." She walked away before Marcus could argue further, her shoulders straight and proud. Around them, the restaurant had mostly returned to its own business, though Marcus could still feel occasional glances in their direction. The hostility was still there from some quarters, but it had been joined by something else: curiosity, reflection, and from a few tables, something that looked almost like shame. Tyler was demolishing his bread, slathering it with butter and honey in quantities that would definitely spoil his appetite for dinner. Marcus was too emotionally wrung out to care. James sipped his coffee slowly, holding the mug in both hands as if drawing warmth from it, as if it were the most precious thing he'd ever held. "I was a good Marine," James said suddenly, his eyes on his coffee. "I followed orders. I took care of my men. I believed in the mission, whatever the mission was. I thought when I came home, things would make sense again." But Jenny was gone, and Emily was this stranger who looked at me like I scared her, and I couldn't sleep without seeing things I'd rather forget. Couldn't hold a job because I'd hear a car backfire and I'd be on the ground, convinced we were taking fire. Lost my house, lost my sister's patients, lost everything that mattered, one piece at a time. "How long have you been on the streets?" Marcus asked gently. 5 years, maybe 6. Time gets funny when you don't have a calendar to mark it by. I've been in and out of shelters, but there's more people than beds most nights. Been in and out of VA programs, but the waiting lists are long and the help is short. Been in and out of hope, mostly. He took another sip of coffee. Tonight, standing at that door, I thought maybe things had finally gotten so bad that I was willing to walk in here, knowing I didn't belong, knowing I'd probably get thrown out. I was just so tired of being hungry, so tired of being cold. And then his voice broke. "You did the thing that nobody's done in 5 years. You looked at me and saw a person." The food arrived before Marcus could respond, though he wasn't sure what he would have said anyway. Donna and another waitress brought out 3 plates loaded with the kind of Thanksgiving feast that belonged on magazine covers. The turkey was golden brown and glistening. The mashed potatoes were fluffy white clouds with a pool of rich gravy. The stuffing smelled like sage and butter and home. The green beans were perfectly cooked, still bright green and topped with slivered almonds. The cranberry sauce caught the light like garnets. And the dinner rolls, fresh from the oven, steamed when Tyler immediately tore one open. James stared at his plate as if he'd forgotten what food could look like when it wasn't scavenged from a dumpster or handed out in styrofoam containers at a shelter. His hands hovered over the silverware, and Marcus realized with a jolt that James was nervous about using it, about remembering which fork, about doing it wrong and proving Patricia right, proving that he didn't belong here after all. "I always start with the turkey," Marcus said casually, picking up his fork and knife. "Tyler goes straight for the potatoes. No judgment on technique in this house. We're pretty informal." Tyler was already shoveling mashed potatoes into his mouth, his earlier bread feast apparently having done nothing to diminish his appetite. "This is really good," he said around his mouthful, and Marcus didn't even correct him about talking with his mouth full. James picked up his fork with a hand that trembled slightly, cut a piece of turkey, and took his first bite. His eyes closed, and for a moment he just sat there, chewing slowly, and Marcus realized the man was crying again, silent tears that he didn't bother to wipe away. They ate together as the restaurant hummed with conversation around them, as Thanksgiving continued for families who took for granted that they would have a warm place to sleep tonight, that they would wake up tomorrow with a roof over their heads. And for the first time in a very long time, Marcus felt like he'd done something that actually mattered. Not filed a motion or won a case or negotiated a settlement, something real, something human. He looked across the table at James Sullivan, at this broken veteran who was eating a Thanksgiving meal with the reverence of someone receiving communion, and he thought about Tyler's question earlier. Why is she being mean to him? And Marcus realized that Tyler had given him a gift tonight, the gift of remembering that sometimes the right thing to do was also the simple thing. You saw someone suffering, and you stopped it if you could. You saw someone hungry, and you fed them. You saw someone invisible, and you looked at them until they knew they'd been seen. It was, in the end, the most basic kind of human kindness, and in a world that had grown cruel and cold, it felt almost revolutionary. The meal continued in a companionable quiet, broken only by the soft clink of silverware and Tyler's occasional commentary on the superiority of these particular mashed potatoes over all other mashed potatoes in recorded history. James ate slowly, methodically, as if each bite required conscious thought and effort. Marcus noticed that he seemed to be pacing himself, eating in a way that suggested his body had forgotten what it meant to be truly full, and he was trying not to overwhelm a system that had learned to survive on scraps. "Mr. Sullivan," Tyler said suddenly, setting down his fork with the serious expression he got when he was thinking hard about something. Can I ask you a question? Dad says it's not polite to ask. Strangers' personal things, but you're not really a stranger anymore because we're having dinner together. And Dad also says that sharing a meal makes people friends. So, can I? James looked up from his plate, and something in his weathered face softened. You can call me James, and yes, you can ask me anything you want. I'll answer if I can. Tyler adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit he'd had since he first got them in first grade. What's it like? Being in a war, I mean. Miss Patterson showed us pictures in school about veterans, and she said they're heroes, but she didn't really explain what they actually do. Were you scared? Marcus opened his mouth to intervene, to tell Tyler that maybe that was too personal, too heavy a question for a Thanksgiving dinner. But James raised a hand slightly, a gesture that said it was all right. Yeah, buddy, I was scared, James said, his voice quiet but steady. Pretty much all the time. People think being a Marine means you're not afraid, but that's not true. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do what needs to be done anyway. You take care of the people next to you. You follow your orders. You try to make it through the day so you can see the next one. Did you have friends there? Tyler asked. In the war? I did, James said, and his eyes got that distant look again, seeing something beyond the warm restaurant, beyond the present moment. Best friends I ever had, the kind of friends you make when your lives depend on each other. We were a team. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. We called ourselves the Warlords, which I know sounds scary, but it made us feel strong, like we could handle whatever came at us. Are they still your friends now? The question was so innocent, so achingly simple, and it landed like a blow. James set down his fork carefully, his hand trembling. Some of them didn't make it home. The ones who did, I lost touch with. When things fell apart for me, when I ended up on the streets, I was too ashamed to reach out. Didn't want them to see what I'd become. Didn't want them to know that the guy they'd trusted with their lives couldn't even keep a roof over his own head. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the recognition of shame he understood too well. Trauma doesn't discriminate, he said quietly. It doesn't matter how strong you are or how well trained. When life breaks you, it breaks you. There's no shame in that. James met his eyes, and there was gratitude there, mixed with pain. Easy to say, harder to believe when you're sleeping in a cardboard box under an overpass. How did it happen? Marcus asked. The descent from soldier to civilian to... He gestured vaguely, not wanting to use the word homeless, not wanting to reduce James to a label. James took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. Outside the window, it had started to snow, tiny flakes that caught the light from the restaurant and swirled in. The darkness like fallen stars. It wasn't one thing. It was 1,000 little things, like a wall crumbling one brick at a time. Jenny died in 2007 while I was on my 2nd Iraq tour. She'd been feeling sick, but she didn't tell me how bad it was because she didn't want me to worry, didn't want me distracted when I needed to focus on staying alive. By the time the Red Cross got me emergency leave, she was in hospice. She died 3 days after I got home. I held her hand and watched her go, and it felt like someone had reached into my chest and torn out everything that mattered. Tyler had stopped eating entirely, his eyes wide and shining with tears. Marcus reached over and squeezed his shoulder. I had to go back, James continued, his voice flat now, reciting facts to keep the emotion at bay. Finish my tour. 6 more months in a desert that felt like the surface of the sun, doing a job that suddenly felt pointless because the person I was doing it for was gone. When I finally got out in 2012, I thought things would get better. I thought I could rebuild. I had Emily, my daughter. She was 11 by then. But I wasn't the dad she remembered. I couldn't sleep without nightmares. Loud noises sent me into panic attacks. I'd be at the grocery store, and suddenly I'd be convinced we were under attack, and I'd be on the floor, covered in sweat, while everyone stared at me like I was crazy. He paused, stabbing at a green bean without eating it. I got a job at a warehouse. Lasted 3 months before I decked a supervisor who came up behind me too quickly. Got a job doing construction. Lasted 2 months before I froze up on a scaffold because a car backfired, and I thought it was gunfire. Got a job washing dishes at a diner. That one lasted almost a year, which felt like a victory, until I had a full breakdown during the dinner rush and ended up in a 72-hour psychiatric hold. The VA tried to help, he said. I'm not saying they didn't. But there were waiting lists for everything. 6 months for a psychiatric appointment, a year for a PTSD program that actually had beds available. And they'd give me pills that made me feel like a zombie, or pills that made me feel nothing at all, and neither one made me feel like me. I started drinking to sleep. Then I was drinking to get through the day. Then I was drinking to forget I was drinking. Marcus watched James's face as he spoke, saw the self-loathing and exhaustion there, the weight of 1,000 bad choices made by a good man in impossible circumstances. What about your daughter? You said your sister took her? My sister Lisa, James said, and his voice cracked on the name. She tried. God knows she tried. Took Emily in, gave me a place to stay too. But I couldn't hold it together. The nightmares got worse. I'd wake up screaming, scaring Emily half to death. I'd disappear for days on drinking binges. I'd pick fights with Lisa's husband over nothing one night. I woke up in their living room with my hands around a lamp, ready to use it as a weapon because in my dream, in my head, I was back in Fallujah and someone was coming through the door. Emily saw me. She looked at me like I was a monster. She was 12 years old, and she looked at her own father like he was something to be afraid of. The pain in his voice was so raw that Marcus had to look away. Tyler had tears running down his cheeks, and he was making no effort to hide them. Lisa asked me to leave, James said, not because she didn't love me, because she did love me, and she loved Emily more. She said I needed help she couldn't give me, and Emily needed stability I couldn't provide. So I left, lived in my car for a while until I couldn't afford the car anymore, then shelters when I could get a bed, then the streets when I couldn't. That was 5 years ago. I've been trying to climb back up ever since, but it's like the hole just keeps getting deeper. Can't get a job without an address. Can't get an address without a job. Can't get help from the VA without being able to show up to appointments, but you can't show up when you don't have transportation or a phone or clean clothes. It's a system designed to keep you exactly where you are. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of a life lived in margins, in the gaps between society's safety nets. Marcus thought about his own life, about the comfortable apartment he and Tyler lived in, about the steady paycheck and the health insurance, and the 1,000 invisible advantages he'd always taken for granted. The distance between his life and James's suddenly felt terrifyingly small, separated only by a few strokes of bad luck and the absence of a support system. I'm sorry, Marcus said, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. For what it's worth, I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You served your country, you survived hell, you lost the person you loved most, and you're still here. You're still fighting. That takes more courage than most people will ever understand. James shook his head. I'm not brave. I'm just too stubborn to quit completely. Some days that stubbornness is the only thing that keeps me breathing. Tyler had been quiet for a long time, processing everything he'd heard with the intensity of a child trying to make sense of adult pain. Finally, he said, I think you're brave, and I think your daughter probably misses you. Even if she was scared, I bet she still loves you, because that's what kids do. They love their dads even when things are hard. James looked at Tyler, and something in his face crumbled and rebuilt itself in the same moment. Thank you, son. That means more than you know. Marcus noticed that Tyler had started eating again, but in his peculiar way, separating his food into distinct sections on his plate, eating one thing completely before moving to the next, cutting everything into very specific sizes. It was a pattern Marcus had seen 1,000 times, but had stopped really noticing. James, however, was watching with the focused attention of someone trained to observe details. You're very particular about your food, James said to Tyler, his tone curious but kind. Does it bother you when things touch each other on the plate? Tyler looked up, surprised and a little embarrassed. He glanced at his father, who nodded encouragingly. Yeah, Tyler said softly. Sometimes foods feel wrong in my mouth, like they're too squishy or too crunchy or the textures are fighting each other, and I have to eat them in a certain order or it feels like everything's mixed up and wrong. The doctor said I have a sensory processing thing. It makes eating hard sometimes. James nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. I knew a lot of guys in the service who dealt with similar stuff. Sometimes it was from traumatic brain injuries. Sometimes it was just the way their brains were wired. We had one guy in our unit, Rodriguez, who couldn't eat anything that was too soft. Said it felt like trying to swallow cotton. Another guy couldn't handle anything touching on his plate. Had to use one of those divided trays like they give kids in elementary school, and he was 32 years old. Nobody gave him grief about it because we all had our things, you know? War changes your brain in weird ways, makes some things harder and some things impossible. Tyler's eyes widened. Really? So it's not just me being weird? Not even a little bit, James said firmly. Your brain processes information differently than some other people's brains. That's not weird. That's just how you're built. And you know what? I bet there are things you can do that other people find impossible. I bet you notice details they miss. I bet you think about problems in ways that never occur to them. The stuff that makes life hard for you probably also makes you special in ways most people don't appreciate. Marcus felt his throat tighten. They'd been to therapists and occupational therapists and special education coordinators, and all of them had said versions of the same thing, but somehow hearing it from James, from this broken veteran who understood what it meant to have a brain that didn't work the way the world expected it to, seemed to land differently for Tyler. I'm really good at math, Tyler offered shyly, and I can remember whole pages of books after I read them once. My teacher says I have a photographic memory. See? James said, and he was smiling now, a real smile that transformed his face and let Marcus glimpse the man he must have been before the war, before the loss, before the long fall into darkness. Special. I knew it the minute I met you. Around them, the restaurant had grown quieter as dinner wound down, and families began settling their bills and bundling into coats for the cold walk to their cars. Marcus noticed that the atmosphere had shifted in subtle ways. People weren't avoiding looking at their table anymore. Instead, several diners were watching them with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that looked almost like respect. The teenage girl who had been recording earlier had put her phone away, but she was still watching, her face thoughtful. The man with the American flag pin got up from his table and walked over, his stride purposeful but not aggressive. He stopped beside James and extended his hand. Thank you for your service, he said simply. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. My son served with the 5th. He didn't make it back from his second deployment. Seeing your patch, knowing there are still warlords out there, that means something to me. I'm sorry for what you've been through. I'm sorry we as a country have failed you. James shook his hand, and both men held on for a moment longer than necessary, two fathers connected by the invisible threads of shared loss and military tradition. When the man walked away, there were tears in his eyes, and James was staring at his hand, as if the handshake had returned something to him he thought was lost forever. His identity as a Marine, his membership in a brotherhood he thought had forgotten him. Donna returned to clear their plates, and Marcus was struck by how much food James had actually eaten. The plate was nearly clean, scraped so thoroughly that it looked like it had already been through the dishwasher. Pie, Donna asked, her voice warm. We have pumpkin, apple, and pecan. Pumpkin, Tyler said immediately. Same, Marcus agreed. James hesitated, then said quietly, Could I possibly have a piece to take with me? For later? I don't want to presume on your kindness any more than I already have. You can have pie now, and pie to go, Donna said firmly. And James, if I can speak plainly, you haven't presumed on anyone's kindness. These gentlemen offered you a seat at their table because they saw someone who needed help and they had the courage to provide it. That's not a burden. That's what community is supposed to look like. That's what human beings are supposed to do for each other. So you sit there and you eat your pie and you let yourself be cared for just for one night. The world will go back to being hard tomorrow. Tonight, let it be easy. She walked away before James could respond, and Marcus saw the veteran's shoulders shake with silent sobs. Tyler reached across the table again and took James's hand, holding it with the fierce loyalty of a child who had decided this man was worth protecting. The pie arrived. 3 generous slices with dollops of fresh whipped cream melting into the warm, spiced pumpkin. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall harder outside, watching the city transform into something clean and new under the white blanket. And Marcus thought about how strange it was that a day that had started as just another Thanksgiving, another year of marking time since Rachel's death, had become something else entirely. A reminder that connection could happen in the most unexpected places, that kindness was a choice available in every moment, and that sometimes the people who seemed most broken were actually the ones holding themselves together with a strength that defied understanding. The pie had been reduced to crumbs and smears of whipped cream when Marcus noticed Patricia Holbrook's behavior had shifted from righteous indignation to something that looked unsettlingly like panic. She was standing near the hostess stand, her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesticulating sharply as she spoke in a voice too low to hear, but urgent enough that her whole body seemed to vibrate with tension. Her eyes kept darting toward their table, then away, then back again, as if she couldn't help herself. "She's been watching us for the last 20 minutes, James said quietly, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the restaurant. He hadn't looked directly at Patricia, but Marcus realized he'd been tracking her movements in the reflection of the window, using the glass as a mirror. Not just watching, monitoring. There's a difference. Marcus set down his coffee cup and studied James with new interest. The exhausted, broken veteran who had walked through the door an hour ago had been gradually replaced by someone else, someone with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. "You notice that kind of thing?" "Old habits," James said, still watching Patricia's reflection. "I did loss prevention for a while before things got really bad. Worked security at a big retail chain. You learn to read body language, to spot when someone's behavior doesn't match their environment. She's displaying classic signs of someone who's done something wrong and is afraid of getting caught." "What kind of signs?" Marcus asked, his lawyer brain suddenly engaged in a way it hadn't been all evening. James took a sip of his coffee, his movements casual, but Marcus could see the military training beneath the surface now, the way he kept his body angled to maintain sight lines, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room. "She's making what we call reassurance checks. Every 2 to 3 minutes, she looks at the back office, then at the kitchen entrance, then at us. She's making sure whatever she's worried about is still secure, still hidden, still under her control. And she's making a lot of phone calls for someone who's supposed to be managing a busy restaurant on a holiday. See how she keeps walking away from other staff members to make those calls? That's isolation behavior. She doesn't want anyone to overhear what she's saying." Marcus glanced at Patricia, who had just ended one call and was already dialing another, her face flushed and her movements jerky. Could just be stress. Managing a place like this on Thanksgiving can't be easy. "Could be," James agreed, "but add in how aggressive she was about getting me out of here. That wasn't normal management protecting the business. That was personal. That was fear." Tyler had been listening to this exchange with growing excitement, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Are you guys like detectives now? Is this a mystery? Because this is way more interesting than the mysteries in my books." Marcus laughed despite himself. "We're not detectives, buddy. We're just observing." "You're a lawyer," Tyler pointed out with irrefutable 8-year-old logic. "Lawyers are basically detectives, but with briefcases instead of magnifying glasses. And James used to catch bad guys at stores, so you're totally detectives." James smiled, and Marcus was struck again by how different he looked when he wasn't carrying the full weight of his circumstances, when he was engaged in something that required his skills and attention rather than just his survival. The kid's got a point. Patricia had disappeared into the back office now, the door closing firmly behind her. Through the small window in the door, Marcus could see her pacing, phone still pressed to her ear. "What would you do?" he asked James. "If you were still in security and you saw someone acting like that?" "I'd want to know what she's protecting," James said immediately. "In retail theft, it's almost never about the person. It's about the thing, the merchandise they stole, the cash they skimmed, the inventory they're moving out the back door. Whatever Patricia is worried about, it's not us. We're just a complication. We're people who've drawn attention to her, which means more eyes in the restaurant, more people watching. That's the last thing someone hiding something wants. Marcus felt a familiar thrill, the one he got when he was working a case, and all the scattered pieces suddenly started forming a pattern. She called this a family establishment, said I was welcome to take my business elsewhere. But she didn't actually want me to leave, did she? She wanted James to leave, specifically. Why? Because I'm homeless, James said flatly. Because I represent the exact demographic she's supposedly trying to avoid. But here's what's interesting. This is an upscale place, right? The kind of restaurant that doesn't usually have problems with homeless people wandering in. You've got a host stand. You've got staff monitoring the entrance. I shouldn't have made it past the front door if they had any kind of real policy about appearance standards, but I did. I walked right in, and nobody stopped me until I was already in the dining room where everyone could see. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. You think she let you in on purpose? But why would she do that if she was just going to throw you out? I don't know, James admitted, but something's not right here. My gut's been screaming at me since we sat down, and I learned a long time ago to trust my gut. It kept me alive in places where thinking too much could get you killed. Donna appeared at their table to refill their coffee, and Marcus noticed she glanced at the closed office door with an expression that might have been concern or might have been fear. On impulse, he asked, Donna, is Patricia always this hands-on with management, making lots of calls, checking the office constantly? Donna's hand hesitated over Marcus's cup just for a second, but it was enough. It's a busy night, she said carefully, too carefully. Lots of moving parts on a holiday. But is she always like this? Marcus pressed gently. Donna looked around to make sure no one else was in earshot, then leaned in slightly. She's been different the last few months, more stressed, more secretive. There are areas of the restaurant she doesn't want certain staff going into anymore, which never used to be an issue. And she's been very involved in our charity program. Charity program? James asked, his voice sharpening slightly. Every year around the holidays, we collect donations for homeless veterans, Donna said, and Marcus saw James's entire body go rigid. We have collection boxes at the register, and Patricia personally manages the fund. She's very passionate about it. Her father was a veteran, she always says. It's one of the few things that seems to make her happy. She hurried away to attend to another table, and Marcus and James looked at each other across the remnants of their Thanksgiving dinner. The same thought was written clearly on both their faces. That's what she's protecting, James said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The charity donations, money collected in the name of helping people exactly like me, people she just tried to throw out into the snow. We don't know that for sure, Marcus said, but his lawyer instincts were screaming that James was right. Everything suddenly made horrible sense. Patricia's aggression toward James wasn't about protecting her establishment's atmosphere. It was about keeping him away from something he might recognize, might question, might expose. There's one way to find out, Marcus said. He stood up, casually draping his napkin on the table. Tyler, stay here with James for a minute. I need to use the restroom. Tyler nodded, already launching into an animated description of his favorite mystery book series. James met Marcus's eyes and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He understood. He'd keep Tyler safe and distracted while Marcus did what needed to be done. The restrooms were down a hallway that ran past the kitchen and the manager's office. Marcus walked with the casual confidence of someone who belonged, someone who wasn't doing anything wrong. The office door was still closed, but he could hear Patricia's voice through it, high-pitched and defensive. I don't care what you think you saw. Just keep your mouth shut and let me handle this. You'll get your cut like always. Marcus's heart rate kicked up. He glanced around. The hallway was empty, the kitchen staff too busy with dinner service to pay attention to a random customer walking past. The restroom was just ahead, providing plausible deniability. But next to the office door was a bulletin board covered in health inspection certificates, staff schedules, and other administrative documents. And tucked among them, slightly hidden behind a schedule but not completely concealed, was a flyer. Golden Harvest Veterans Fund, the flyer read in cheerful script surrounded by clip art of American flags and yellow ribbons. This Thanksgiving, help us help those who served. All donations go directly to supporting homeless veterans in our community with meals, shelter, and services. Every dollar makes a difference. Please give generously. At the bottom was a picture of a collection box, one of those clear plastic donation containers with a slot in the top. Marcus had seen one at the host stand when they'd arrived, had noticed it without really seeing it, the way you notice background details without processing them. He pulled out his phone and quickly took a picture of the flyer, then continued to the restroom. Once inside, he locked the door and leaned against it, his mind racing. It wasn't proof, not by itself, but combined with Patricia's behavior, Donna's careful words, and James's trained observations, it painted a damning picture. He washed his hands, composing himself, then headed back out. As he passed the office, the door suddenly opened, and Patricia nearly collided with him. She jumped back, her eyes wild, and Marcus saw she was sweating despite the comfortable temperature of the restaurant. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice brittle, "enjoying your meal?" "Very much," Marcus said pleasantly. "Your staff has been exceptional. Donna in particular has gone above and beyond. You should be proud of the team you've built." Something flickered in Patricia's eyes at the mention of Donna. Suspicion, maybe, or calculation. Donna is one of our longest-serving employees, very dedicated, sometimes too dedicated, if you know what I mean. Gets a bit too personally involved with customers. It was a warning, Marcus realized, a threat disguised as small talk. Don't get too friendly with the staff. Don't ask too many questions. Mind your own business. "I appreciate dedication," Marcus said, holding her gaze, "especially people who are dedicated to doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. Even when it might cost them something." Patricia's face went pale, then red. "Yes, well, enjoy the rest of your evening." She pushed past him and disappeared toward the kitchen, her phone already back at her ear. When Marcus returned to the table, he found Tyler showing James how to make a paper crane from his napkin, their heads bent together in concentration. The sight made something in Marcus's chest squeeze tight. Tyler looked happy, engaged in a way he hadn't been in months. And James looked almost peaceful, the haunted darkness in his eyes temporarily replaced by focus and something that might have been joy. "Dad," Tyler announced as Marcus sat down, "James knows how to do origami, real origami, not just the easy stuff. He learned it from a guy in his unit who was Japanese-American. He's going to teach me how to make a dragon." "That's great, buddy," Marcus said. Then, lowering his voice, he said to James, "We need to talk, not here. But I think you're right. I think she's stealing from the charity fund." James's jaw tightened. "How sure are you?" 70%, maybe 80. "I heard part of a phone conversation. She was telling someone to keep quiet. Mentioned, 'You're cut like always.' And there are donation boxes all over this restaurant collecting money supposedly for homeless veterans." "The irony," James said, his voice bitter, "is almost too perfect. She's stealing from people like me while literally throwing people like me out of her restaurant. She can't have actual homeless veterans around because we might ask questions. We might wonder where the money's going. We might realize we've never seen a dime of the help she's supposedly providing." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed James the photo of the flyer. "This says all donations go directly to supporting homeless veterans with meals, shelter, and services. That's a legally binding statement. If she's not actually providing those services, if she's pocketing the money, that's fraud. That's theft. And depending on how much she's collected, it could be felony level." "How do we prove it?" James asked. "We need documentation," Marcus said, slipping naturally into lawyer mode. "Financial records, bank statements, proof of what money came in versus what went out, proof of whether any services were actually provided." "That'll all be in her office," James said. "Probably on her computer or in filing cabinets, standard bookkeeping." "Which we can't access without her permission or a warrant," Marcus said, frustrated. "And we don't have grounds for a warrant. We have suspicions and one overheard phone call. That's not enough." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them thinking. Tyler had finished his paper crane and was working on a second one, humming softly to himself. Around them, the restaurant was beginning to empty out as families finished their meals and headed home. The snow outside was falling heavily now, accumulating on the streets and sidewalks. "There might be another way," James said slowly. "When I worked loss prevention, we dealt with internal theft all the time. Employees stealing from the register, managers cooking the books. You can't always wait for perfect evidence. Sometimes you have to force an error." "What kind of error?" Marcus asked. "People who are stealing are always afraid of being caught," James explained. They're constantly monitoring their environment, looking for threats. We've already made Patricia nervous just by being here, just by paying attention. If we can make her think she's about to be exposed, if we can apply enough pressure, she might do something stupid. She might try to hide evidence or move money or contact accomplices. And when people rush, they make mistakes. They leave trails. Marcus considered this. It was risky. It wasn't the methodical, by-the-book approach he usually took to building cases. But James was right about one thing. They had an opportunity here, tonight, to potentially expose something that had probably been going on for months or even years. How many donations had Patricia collected and pocketed? How much money had been given in good faith to help veterans like James, only to line her pockets instead? "What do you suggest?" Marcus asked. James leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "We make her think we know more than we do. We ask pointed questions. We mention the donation boxes. We talk about charity fraud laws, loudly enough that she overhears. We make her panic, and then we watch what she does next." It wasn't a perfect plan. It relied on Patricia being scared enough to make mistakes, but not so scared that she simply destroyed evidence and disappeared. But Marcus had learned in his years of practicing law that perfect opportunities rarely presented themselves. Sometimes you had to work with what you had. "Okay," he said, "let's do it. But Tyler, buddy, I need you to stay close to James no matter what happens. Can you do that for me?" Tyler looked between his father and James, his eyes wide but excited rather than scared. "Are we catching a bad guy? Like for real?" "Maybe," Marcus said. "But the most important thing is that you stay safe. So you stick with James, okay? He'll keep you safe." "I will," James promised, and there was something fierce in his voice, something that reminded Marcus that this man had been a Marine, had protected people in actual war zones. Tyler would be safe with him. Marcus stood up and walked deliberately toward the host stand where one of the donation boxes sat, its clear plastic sides showing it was about half full of cash and checks. He made a show of studying it, reading the label, pulling out his wallet. Patricia materialized at his elbow as if summoned. "Making a donation?" she asked, her voice strained. "I was thinking about it," Marcus said pleasantly. "It's a wonderful program. Very generous of you to collect for homeless veterans. How long have you been running this fund?" 3 years, Patricia said automatically, then seemed to realize she'd answered without thinking. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Marcus said. "I handle a lot of nonprofit law in my practice. I'm always interested in how different organizations structure their charitable giving. Do you work with any specific veteran services, shelters, VA programs, that kind of thing?" Patricia's smile was rigid, a mask stretched too tight. "We work with several organizations, very reputable ones, all above board." "I'm sure," Marcus said. "It's just that my firm handles compliance for several charities, and we've seen an uptick in fraud cases lately. People collecting donations for causes that don't actually exist or grossly inflating their administrative costs. It's terrible, really. The penalties for that kind of fraud are severe. Federal charges in some cases." He said it casually, conversationally, but he watched Patricia's face closely. And there it was, the flash of pure panic, quickly suppressed but undeniable. "Well," she said, her voice too high, too bright, "we certainly don't have those problems here. Everything is completely legitimate. I should get back to work. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." She practically fled toward her office, and Marcus returned to the table with a grim sense of satisfaction. "She's scared," he said to James, "really scared." "Good," James said. "Now we wait and see what she does next." They didn't have to wait long. 15 minutes after Marcus's pointed conversation about charity fraud, Patricia emerged from her office carrying a large black duffel bag. Her movements were jerky, her eyes darting around the restaurant like a cornered animal looking for an escape route. She didn't see Marcus and James watching her in the reflection of the window, tracking her progress across the dining room toward the back exit near the kitchen. "She's running," James said quietly. "That bag wasn't in her hands when she went into the office. She packed something. Documents, probably. Maybe cash." Marcus's hand was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Wait," James said, his hand covering Marcus's. "If she gets out that door, we lose her. She's spooked enough that she might not come back. We need to stall her, keep her here until the cops arrive." How? Marcus asked. James stood up, his movements fluid and purposeful. The broken homeless man was completely gone now, replaced by the Marine he'd once been, the security professional he'd trained to be. Tyler, stay in this seat. Don't move until your dad or I come back for you. Understand? Tyler nodded solemnly, sensing the seriousness of the moment. James walked directly toward Patricia, intercepting her path to the back exit. His voice, when he spoke, carried across the quieter restaurant with the authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. Ms. Holbrook, I think you dropped something. Patricia stopped dead, the duffel bag clutched against her chest. I don't know what you're talking about. Get out of my way. Funny thing, James said conversationally, but loud enough that nearby diners were turning to watch. I used to work loss prevention. Got pretty good at spotting when someone was about to walk out with merchandise that didn't belong to them. You've got that look right now. The bag, the nervous energy, the back exit instead of the front door. Classic theft behavior. Patricia's face went from pale to crimson. You have no right to accuse me of anything. You're trespassing and I want you out of my restaurant immediately. Actually, Marcus said, appearing at James's shoulder, his phone now openly recording the confrontation, I'd like to know what's in the bag, because about 20 minutes ago I happened to overhear you on the phone telling someone to keep their mouth shut about something, mentioning you're cut like always. And now you're trying to leave through the back door with a bag you didn't have earlier. As an attorney, I find that sequence of events very interesting. The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Every diner was watching. Donna stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, her hand over her mouth. The other waitstaff had stopped moving, trays forgotten in their hands. This is outrageous, Patricia sputtered, but her voice cracked. You can't just accuse me of crimes. I'm calling the police. Please do, Marcus said calmly. In fact, I'm way ahead of you. He held up his phone, showing that he'd already dialed 911, and the call was connected. Hi, yes, I'm at the Golden Harvest restaurant on Maple Street. I'm an attorney, and I'm witnessing what I believe is theft in progress. The manager is attempting to leave the premises with what may be stolen property. Patricia made a sound like a wounded animal and bolted for the back exit. But James, despite his age and his hard years, was faster. He stepped smoothly into her path, his body language making it clear she'd have to physically push past him to get through. And Patricia, for all her bluster, wasn't willing to assault someone in front of a room full of witnesses. Let me through, she hissed. I can't do that, ma'am, James said quietly. Not until we sort this out. Not until we figure out what's in that bag and whether it belongs to you or to the homeless veterans you've been collecting donations for. The words hung in the air like an accusation and a revelation. The pieces clicked into place for everyone watching. The donation boxes, the charity program, the manager's violent reaction to an actual homeless veteran entering her restaurant. It was too obvious now, too damning. A woman at a nearby table stood up, her voice shaking with anger. I donated $100 to that fund last month. My brother is a veteran. You told me it would help people like him. I donated $50, another diner called out. I gave $200 at Christmas, said the man with the flag pin, his voice hard as stone. The back door burst open, and a man in an expensive wool coat strode in, his face flushed from the cold. He was in his 60s, silver-haired and distinguished, with the bearing of someone used to command. What the hell's going on here? He demanded. Patricia, I got your text that there was an emergency. Mr. Grayson, Patricia said, and her voice was suddenly small, defeated. These people are making insane accusations. They're harassing me. I'm the owner of this establishment, Grayson said, looking from Patricia to Marcus to James. Someone want to tell me what's happening? Marcus stepped forward, his lawyer persona fully engaged. Mr. Grayson, my name is Marcus Chen. I'm an attorney. This evening, I observed your manager attempt to forcibly remove a homeless veteran from your restaurant on Thanksgiving, claiming he was disturbing other guests. When I intervened and insisted he be allowed to dine here, your manager became increasingly agitated. Over the course of the evening, I observed behavior consistent with someone engaged in theft or fraud. I overheard a phone conversation in which she told someone to keep quiet and mentioned, "You're cut like always." And just now, I watched her pack a bag and attempt to leave through the back exit rather than the front door. Given that your restaurant has been collecting charitable donations for homeless veterans, and given her extreme reaction to an actual homeless veteran being present, I have reason to believe she's been embezzling from that fund." Grayson's face went from flushed to ashen. He looked at Patricia with an expression of dawning horror. "Tell me that's not true. Patricia, tell me right now that you haven't been stealing from the charity fund." "I can explain," Patricia started, but her voice broke. "Open the bag," Grayson said, his voice flat and terrible. "I don't have to. Open it now, or I open it myself, and you're fired either way." Patricia's hands were shaking so badly she could barely unzip the duffel. When she did, the contents were damning beyond any doubt. Stacks of cash, bundled and rubber-banded, a laptop computer, file folders stuffed with papers, a ledger book. Grayson stared at the bag's contents, then at Patricia, then at the donation box visible at the host stand. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How long have you been doing this?" 2 years, Patricia said, and then she was crying, her carefully constructed persona finally crumbling completely. "Maybe longer. I don't know. It started small, just skimming a little off the top. But then there was more coming in than I expected, and nobody was checking, nobody was auditing, and I thought just a little more wouldn't hurt. The veterans wouldn't miss it. They were homeless anyway. What difference would it make?" The cruelty of those words, the casual dismissal of human suffering, landed like a physical blow. James made a sound in his throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "What difference would it make?" he repeated. "Lady, that money could have been the difference between someone eating or starving, between someone getting into a treatment program or dying on the street, between someone having hope or giving up completely." The police arrived then, 2 officers who looked confused by the scene they'd walked into. An upscale restaurant full of well-dressed diners, a manager in tears with a duffel bag full of cash, and a homeless veteran standing in the middle of it all like an avenging angel. Marcus took charge, explaining the situation with the clear, precise language of someone who'd done this before. He showed them his recording of Patricia's attempted exit. He pointed out the donation boxes and the flyers advertising the charity program. He explained what he'd overheard and observed. One of the officers, a young woman with sharp eyes, looked at the ledger book from Patricia's bag. "This is handwritten," she said. 2 sets of numbers. One column shows donations received, the other shows what was supposedly distributed. But the distributed column is in different ink and different handwriting. This looks like it was added later, fabricated to make it seem like the money went where it was supposed to. Patricia was crying harder now, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. "I was going to pay it back. I swear I was. I just needed a little more time." "How much did you take?" Grayson asked, his voice hollow. The officer checked the ledger, her face grim. "According to this, over the last 2 years, this restaurant collected approximately $73,000 in donations for homeless veterans. The falsified distribution records claim $68,000 was spent on various services. I'm guessing the actual amount spent was considerably less." "Nothing," Patricia whispered. "I didn't actually give any of it away. I kept telling myself I would, that I'd make a big donation all at once, but then there were bills, and my mortgage, and my car payment, and it just kept piling up." The silence that followed was absolute. $73,000. Money given by people who wanted to help, who believed they were making a difference, stolen by someone who saw vulnerable veterans as nothing more than a convenient cover story for theft. Grayson looked at James, really looked at him for the first time, and something in his face changed. "2nd Battalion, 5th Marines," he said, reading the patch on James's jacket. "When did you serve?" 2000 to 2012, James said. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. "I was Army," Grayson said. "Vietnam, 67 to 69. 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star that I didn't deserve half as much as the guys who didn't make it home." He walked over to James and extended his hand. "I am so deeply sorry. Sorry for what she did. Sorry for how you were treated in my restaurant. Sorry that we as a country have failed you so completely that you ended up on the streets while people like her stole money that was supposed to help you." James shook his hand, and Marcus saw tears streaming down the veteran's weathered face. "Patricia, you're fired," Grayson said, not even looking at her. "I'll be pressing charges personally, and I'll be working with the district attorney to make sure you face the maximum penalty. Officers, please get her out of my restaurant." As the police led Patricia away, her hands now cuffed behind her back, the restaurant remained silent. Then, Slowly, the man with the flag pin stood up and began to clap. The sound was startling in the quiet, but within seconds, others joined in. The applause built and built until the entire restaurant was on its feet, clapping not for a show or a performance, but for justice, for dignity restored, for the simple act of one person standing up when everyone else had been content to look away. Grayson raised his hands, asking for quiet. When the applause died down, he said, "I'm ashamed that this happened in my establishment. I'm ashamed that I didn't catch it sooner, that I didn't do proper oversight. I promise you all that every single dollar that was stolen will be recovered and donated to legitimate veteran services. And Mr. Sullivan, your meals here are covered for as long as you need them, free of charge. It's the least I can do." The woman in the cream cashmere sweater, who had looked at James with such disgust earlier, approached their table slowly. Her face was red with shame. "I'm sorry," she said to James. "I judged you. I looked at you and saw a problem instead of a person. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Others followed. Apologies mixed with offers of help. Business cards pressed into James's hands. A construction foreman offering day labor work. A woman who ran a transitional housing program for veterans. A man who worked for a staffing agency specializing in placing people with employment gaps. The teenage girl who'd been recording gave James her phone number and her mother's phone number, saying her mom was a social worker who specialized in PTSD treatment and would help free of charge. Through it all, James stood with Tyler at his side, the little boy holding his hand like an anchor. Marcus watched the transformation happening in real time, watched as James went from invisible to seen, from dismissed to valued, from alone to surrounded by community. "I have something I'd like to offer too," Marcus said when the crowd had thinned. "My firm handles a lot of disability and veterans' rights cases. We're good at what we do, but we're missing something. We need someone who understands what veterans are actually going through, someone who can conduct interviews and investigations with sensitivity and insight, someone who notices things other people miss." He met James's eyes. "I'd like to offer you a job as an investigator for my firm. Full-time, with benefits, including health insurance that would cover any treatment you need. It's not charity, it's recognition that you have skills we need and that you deserve the chance to use them." James stared at him, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally he managed, "I don't have a place to live. I don't have clean clothes for an office job. I don't have—" "We'll figure it out," Marcus said firmly. "One step at a time. We'll start with getting you into a motel until we can arrange something more permanent. We'll get you what you need." "But James, I'm serious about this. I'm not offering this because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering it because watching you work tonight, seeing how you read situations and people, I realized you'd be incredible at this work. You'd be helping people like yourself, people the system has failed, and you'd be doing it with the authority and resources of a law firm behind you." Tyler tugged on his father's sleeve. "Does this mean James is going to work with you, Dad? Does this mean we'll get to see him all the time?" "If he wants to," Marcus said, looking at James. "What do you say?" James wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not bothering to hide his tears anymore. "I say yes. I say thank you. I say, I don't know how I got so lucky tonight walking into this restaurant, but I'm grateful. More grateful than I can possibly express." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the kitchen of his apartment, watching James teach Tyler how to properly fold dumplings. It was the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and they'd made it a tradition to have dinner together every Sunday, taking turns cooking. Tonight was James's turn, and he'd decided to make the pot stickers his wife had taught him before his first deployment when they were both young and the world had seemed full of nothing but possibility. "No, like this," James was saying, his hands guiding Tyler's smaller ones. "You want to make sure the edges are sealed completely or all the filling leaks out when you cook them. See? Pinch and fold, pinch and fold." James looked different now. He'd gained weight, healthy weight that filled out his frame and erased some of the gaunt hollows from his cheeks. His hair was cut and neat, his beard trimmed. He wore clean jeans and a sweater Marcus had given him, and his eyes, while still carrying shadows of his past, also carried something new. Hope, purpose, peace. The job had been challenging at first. There had been setbacks, moments when the PTSD threatened to overwhelm him, nights when the nightmares came back with a vengeance. But Marcus had connected him with a therapist who specialized in veteran trauma, and slowly, painfully, James was healing. He was good at the work, better than good. He had an instinct for finding the truth in complicated situations, and his gentleness with traumatized clients was remarkable. In 6 months, he'd become indispensable to the firm. More than that, he'd become family. He came to Tyler's school events. He helped with homework. He taught Tyler things about resilience and courage that Marcus couldn't teach, lessons earned through surviving the unsurvivable. And Tyler had started calling him Uncle James without anyone suggesting it, the title arising naturally from the bond they'd formed. "Dad, look!" Tyler held up a perfectly formed dumpling, his face glowing with pride. "That's beautiful, buddy," Marcus said, and he meant it. Not just the dumpling, but this moment, this life they'd built together. 3 people who'd all been broken in different ways, finding wholeness in each other. "I heard from Emily yesterday," James said quietly as he worked. "My daughter. She wants to meet for coffee next month when she's home from college for winter break. First time I'll see her in 5 years." "That's amazing, James," Marcus said, his throat tight. "She said she's been getting my letters, all of them. She said she wasn't ready before, but she's ready now. And she said," his voice broke, "she said she's proud of me, for getting help, for not giving up, for fighting to come back." "She should be," Marcus said. "We all are." The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, they arrived at the Hope House Veterans Shelter at 7 in the morning to help prepare and serve the holiday meal. James had suggested it weeks ago, had said he needed to give back, needed to offer hope to people still fighting the battles he'd so recently been fighting himself. The shelter was a large, converted warehouse, warm and clean but institutional. About 60 veterans were gathered in the main hall, men and women ranging from their 20s to their 70s, all of them carrying the weight of service and survival. Some were newly homeless, still shocked by how quickly life could unravel. Others had been on the streets for years, their faces carved with hard experience. Marcus and Tyler worked in the kitchen, helping dish up turkey and stuffing and all the traditional sides. But it was James who moved through the dining area, sitting with veterans, talking quietly, listening to their stories. Marcus watched him crouch beside an older woman who'd served in Desert Storm, watched him laugh with a young kid who couldn't have been more than 22 and looked haunted beyond his years. After the meal, the shelter director asked if anyone wanted to share a few words. James stood up slowly, and the room quieted. He looked around at all those faces, at all those people society had forgotten or dismissed or given up on. "My name is James Sullivan," he said. "Exactly 1 year ago today, I was sitting under an overpass, wondering if I had the courage to make it through another winter. I was cold, hungry, and more alone than I'd ever been in my life. I'd lost my wife, my daughter, my home, my sense of purpose. I'd lost myself. I honestly didn't know if I wanted to keep going." The room was completely silent, every person listening with the intensity of those who recognized their own story in his words. "That night, I did something desperate. I walked into an expensive restaurant where I knew I didn't belong, where I knew I'd probably be thrown out. I just wanted one warm meal. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be human. And I was thrown out. The manager told me I was disturbing people, that I was making families uncomfortable. She threatened to call the police." He paused, his eyes finding Marcus and Tyler in the back of the room. But then someone stood up. A single father and his son were having Thanksgiving dinner, and they saw what was happening. And instead of looking away like everyone else, instead of being grateful the problem was being removed, they invited me to their table. 5 words changed my life. "He's eating at my table." James's voice was thick with emotion now. "I want you to know that you are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not the sum of your worst days or your hardest struggles. You are veterans. You are survivors. You are human beings with dignity and worth. And what happened to you, the systems that failed you, the circumstances that broke you, those are not your fault." He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as he could. "It's hard to ask for help. It's hard to keep hoping when everything keeps going wrong. But I'm here to tell you that things can change. One moment of kindness from a stranger saved my life. One person who chose to see me instead of looking through me gave me a reason to keep fighting. And now I have a home. I have a job. I have a family. I'm reconnecting with my daughter. I'm healing. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but I'm healing. If you need help, take it. If someone offers you kindness, accept it. If you're at the end of your rope, hold on just one more day. Because you matter. Your life matters. Your service matters. And there are people out there who will stand up for you if you give them the chance. He sat down to thunderous applause, and Marcus saw that he wasn't the only one crying. All around the room, veterans were wiping their eyes, nodding, some of them smiling for what might have been the first time in a long time. As they were leaving the shelter that evening, Tyler between them holding both their hands, Marcus thought about that night a year ago. He thought about how close he'd come to not standing up, to minding his own business, to letting injustice happen in front of him, because intervening would be awkward and uncomfortable. He thought about all the moments in life where you had a choice, to look away or to look directly at suffering and do something about it. "Dad," Tyler said, breaking into his thoughts, "Miss Patterson says that heroes are people who do the right thing even when it's scary. I think you and Uncle James are heroes." Marcus squeezed his son's hand, then looked over at James, this man who'd lost everything and found a way back, who'd been broken and was learning to be whole, who'd been invisible and now helped others be seen. "I think the real heroes," Marcus said, "are the ones who keep getting up every single day despite everything life throws at them, the ones who survive impossible things and still find ways to be kind, the ones who remember their own pain and use it to ease someone else's." They walked together through the early winter darkness toward Marcus's car, three people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way, bound together by one moment of courage on a Thanksgiving night when the world could have gone one way, but chose instead to go another. Behind them, the shelter glowed with warm light, full of people who were still fighting, still hoping, still holding on, and ahead of them stretched the future, uncertain as it always was, but faced together, which made all the difference. In the end, Marcus realized, that was what redemption looked like. Not a single dramatic moment of salvation, but the quiet, daily choice to see the humanity in others, to stand up when it would be easier to sit down, to believe that one person's courage could create ripples that changed everything. 5 words had saved James's life. "He's eating at my table." But those words had saved Marcus's life too, had pulled him out of his own grief and isolation and reminded him that the purpose of surviving loss wasn't just to endure, but to ensure that others didn't have to suffer alone. As they drove home through the city streets, past houses lit with Thanksgiving celebrations, past warm windows and families gathered together, Marcus felt gratitude flood through him, not for the meal they'd eaten or the work they'd done, but for the gift of knowing that in a world that could be cruel and cold and indifferent, there were still moments of grace. There were still chances to choose compassion. There were still opportunities to look at someone society had declared invisible and say, simply and powerfully, "I see you. You matter. You belong." And sometimes that was all it took to change a life. Sometimes that was everything.